Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to help you get set for Week 10 of fantasy football. We're going to hit some start-sit situations, talk through the impact of some key news items. But Jared, let's start with the most anticipated comeback of the entire season. That is Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco. Not officially back yet. He is practicing, remains limited. Kyle Shanahan said Wednesday after the practice that they want McCaffrey to get 3 straight days of practice with no soreness, no setbacks. He said, quote, usually if you get that in practice, meaning soreness, that means it's going to be worse in the game. So they're looking for him to get 3 straight soreness-free days. So we're going to have to wait, I think, until Friday to really see whether McCaffrey's playing in this game. Let's hope that we get some kind of message from Kyle Shanahan about how much to expect McCaffrey to play. I would guess that if they deem him ready to play, he's going to be at least pretty close to full McCaffrey.
Yeah, that'd be my expectation. Shanahan was also asked, I think it was Wednesday, if McCaffrey would get his usual workload if he does play. And Shanahan said, quote, it definitely could, but it also definitely might not. So I don't think we're going to get anything specific from Shanahan. I guess we'll get something from like Rappaport or Schefter on Sunday morning about the plans for McCaffrey. We right now I think have McCaffrey projected at like 75 to 80% of his usual workload, and he's still a top 5 running back for us. Just the lofty height he starts at. So if McCaffrey's active, pretty much every fantasy team that owns him is going to be starting him.
Yeah, for most people, it's probably not a decision. I don't think that we'll get full last year McCaffrey workload. I doubt that's what the Niners want to give him the rest of the way. He can't be completely out of the woods with this Achilles issue that's affected both legs. Plus, they acknowledged after last season that they probably overworked him a little bit, and Jordan Mason's played well this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get a bit less work. Like you said, we already projected him for less than what he was getting last year, and he's a top 5 running back. Not a question for most players, but I was doing a radio spot on Tuesday, and somebody was basically deciding between Christian McCaffrey and Devon Achane because they've got a loaded backfield. And I mean, we have currently McCaffrey a couple spots ahead of Achane and PPR. If I'm making that decision, though, I would have to put Achane in my own lineup.
Yeah, I could see that. I think someone like Alvin Kamara, who was available in round 5, 6, 7 at drafts this summer, there could be teams that are deciding between Kamara and McCaffrey. I'd have no issue again starting those guys, but again, we're talking about running backs that are in the top 8 of our rankings. If you get beyond that range, even into someone like Jonathan Taylor, Aaron Jones, I'd lean towards starting McCaffrey even over those guys. Again, unless we hear that McCaffrey's going to be on some type of a snap count.
Yeah, and I mentioned it before. We do those rankings, we do the projections to try to help you sort out your starting options. But if guys are close together and you're feeling the lower ranked guy, feel free to use them, especially when a lot of the difference in ultimate value can just come down to touchdown luck. So don't be afraid to use somebody who's a spot or 2 behind McCaffrey in the rankings. Elsewhere among the Niners, there are some injury questions. Obviously, none as big as McCaffrey, but we've got Deebo Samuel. He did practice Wednesday on a limited basis, coming off the rib and oblique injuries that he sustained in the last game before the bye, which was last week. So we're going to have to watch Deebo this week, but I think the fact that he was practicing at all Wednesday points to him likely playing in this game. It didn't sound like they expected it to be significant issues heading into the bye. So I would bet on Deebo playing. And then I think the bigger question, Jared, is beyond Deebo, is there another 49ers wide receiver that we should look to play for week 10?
Yeah, Juwan Jennings also limited on Wednesday coming off his hip injury. We haven't, I don't think we've seen Jennings and Pearsall together yet this season, have we? So that's kind of the question. Now, they're going to be the number 2 and number 3 wide receivers for this team behind Deebo. So I think both guys, should be on the field a decent amount. We'll see exactly how snaps are divvied, how they're using these guys alignment-wise, how the targets are split between them. I think Jennings and Pearsall are guys you can consider as, borderline wide receiver 3-4 plays this week, nice flex plays. The 49ers have a 28.25 point implied total. That's second highest on the week. The Bucs are 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So it's a good spot. I think one of those guys will have a nice game. One of them probably disappoints. Figuring out which one I think is impossible at this point. But I think, again, if you're down there looking for a wide receiver for flex play, I think Jennings and Pearsall both have exciting upside in that range.
Right. I wouldn't chase after either one as a specific option, but if you were looking down there in like wide receiver 4 range for a player, then 49ers wide receiver is usually a fairly good bet to make. Juwan Jennings, I think we'll have to see what we learn about his status heading into the weekend. If he stays limited and is questionable, I'd have a tough time trusting him in my lineup. Would lean Pearsall there. But, again, we'll watch the practice reports on all these 49ers heading into the weekend. We don't have to watch practice reports on Dak Prescott because he is out for a while. We're still waiting to see exactly how long that's going to be with the hamstring injury, but we know at the very least not going to play this week against the Eagles, barring some miracle. That means Cooper Rush starting at quarterback. And we haven't seen much of Cooper Rush, but we did get 5 games of him starting in place of Dak Prescott back in 2022. And we got 191 passing yards per game from Cooper Rush over that span. That's way down even from Dak Prescott's numbers this year and what's been a struggling Dallas offense. 247.3 are his passing yards per game. Dak's been even better on the road throughout his career, and that includes this year where he's averaging 283 yards per game at home. So a big drop off in passing upside in this game. What does that mean for other Cowboys viables, obviously starting with CeeDee Lamb?
Yeah, big drop off for sure. The Cowboys are implied for 18 points against the Eagles on Sunday. That's the 5th fewest of the entire week. So, they're down there with the Panthers and the Titans and the Patriots and those types of offenses in this matchup against an Eagles defense that's been really good for the past few weeks now. So tough spot. I mean, I think you probably have to start CeeDee Lamb if you have him, assuming he plays and assuming we don't, hear something about him being super limited in that game. It is a shoulder. He was able to try to play through it in that game last week against the Falcons. He kept re-aggravating it and having to come off the field. That's a concern. Like he takes a big hit or falls on it wrong, he could exit early. So I'm not going to call CeeDee Lamb a must start, but I think he is inside our top 15 wide receivers for the week. Most teams that have him are probably going to have to start him. Outside of that, I mean, I think Jake Ferguson, he's okay in full PPR because of the volume projection, but like we said, big quarterback downgrade. The Eagles are 5th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end, so it was already a bad matchup for him. I think Rico Dowdle is a fringy start this week. He did get nice usage last week. Season highs for Dowdle last week in both snap rate and route rate. Of course, Zeke Elliott did not play in that game. I think is able to play this week. We'll see if the Cowboys activate him. We'll see how much he plays. I don't think he should eat much into Dowdle's work, but we'll see about that. It's just another variable where that question plus the Cowboys offense in general kind of makes Dowdle definitely not a comfortable fantasy play this week. He's in RB3 range in our rankings for the week.
Yeah, not comfortable, but I would say closer to comfortable this week than other weeks because of the Zeke factor, because not having Dak should make the Cowboys lean a bit harder on the backfield. And he's even been a high volume receiver for a running back over the past few weeks, 6 targets each of the past 2 games. So we should get decent usage from Dowdle. We'll see if the offense can support any scoring for him. I certainly wouldn't be excited. CeeDee Lamb, I agree that most cases you probably have to go ahead and start him. It's far less of a have to than usual. But over those 5 rush starts from 2022 that I mentioned before, Lamb did average 9.8 targets, 6.2 catches, 76 yards, and 0.4 touchdowns. So he scored in 2 of the 5 games, had these PPR finishes over those 5 weeks. Wide receiver 24, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 41, wide receiver 30. So obviously a wide range of potential finishes. That's generally the case with wide receivers. We've seen CeeDee Lamb finish outside the top 40 twice this year and inside the top 10 just twice this year. So does he have more downside risk with Cooper Rush? Yes. But does he still have upside? Yes. He should still get plenty of target share. We have him at wide receiver 9 in PPR right now, usually among the top 3. So that's certainly down from the usual. I think it's a personal call really with CeeDee Lamb versus any of the wide receivers behind him. I can't see dropping Lamb below wide receiver 16 in my own decisions though.
And there's a bunch of other injured wide receivers right behind him in the rankings too, with AJ Brown and Drake London. So we'll see how all these guys, play out over the next few days here. A few more things. I mean, the 2022 Lamb numbers, they were good with Cooper Rush. That was a better Cowboys offense in general, especially on the offensive line. So I think that's worth considering. Now, Lamb did have a 33 or 34% target share from Rush in those 5 games. If you're going to give me any wide receiver with that type of target share, he's going to be okay. So that's definitely what's working in Lamb's favor. And I do think he'll continue to see, that type of target share with Cooper Rush as long as the shoulder is okay. And then just thinking a bit more long-term with the Cowboys offense, there was a report from Jane Slater of NFL Network last night, who's one of the more plugged-in Cowboys sources out there, that Dak's hamstring is partially torn off the bone, which that usually takes at least 4 weeks to recover from. I was reading some other Twitter doctors saying it could be a 6 to 10 week injury. There was another report, I think, from the Dallas Morning News that Dak is considering surgery for this, which could cost him the rest of the season. So like, this is going to be a lengthy absence, I think. So it's, this Cowboys offense that we've been talking about, it's going to be like this for, I think, at least a month, if not the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, if they go 1-3 or 0-4 of those next 4 weeks, it's only going to make more sense to keep Dak Prescott out at that point. So yeah, speaking of injured wide receivers, we've got Nico Collins still in question for this week. The Texans said that he, quote, passed all the tests, but we didn't see them designate Nico Collins to return yet. He did not practice on Wednesday. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see on Nico Collins before deciding what to do with him, but I think he matters quite a bit for what we do with CJ Stroud this week, right?
For sure. This is like, for me with Stroud, it's like if Nico plays, I'd feel okay starting CJ Stroud. If Nico's out, I'd want to bench CJ Stroud in one quarterback leagues. This season in games with Nico Collins, and I included the Bills game in here, which Nico left around halftime. But if you include that game as, with Nico, 7.8 yards per pass attempt for CJ Stroud. In the last 4 games without Nico Collins, 6.3 yards per pass attempt. And of course, Steph Diggs out now as well. So, and the Lions pass defense is up to 3rd in DVOA. They are 13th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. That's significantly better than they were over the first, month or so of the season. So if Nico's in there, I think Stroud is okay. He's like a borderline quarterback 1, but I would imagine he'll drop, closer to like quarterback 15 if Nico Collins ends up not playing in this game.
Yeah, if we don't have Nico Collins, I would put Stroud somewhere behind Justin Herbert at QB 16 for this week. He would be somebody that would be actively trying not to start in that case because there's not a whole lot else going for these Texans right now. So I guess in the range that we're talking about now, currently just behind CJ Stroud, but above some of the other guys that Stroud might drop behind, is Daniel Jones. Jared, he's a QB 11. Are we really using Daniel Jones this week against the Panthers?
I mean, if you're not using him now, like, why is he on your roster? Because you're not going to get a much better spot than Carolina. And you got to know what you're getting with Daniel Jones, which is volatility, which has been the story of his NFL career. This season, Jones has 5 weeks where he's finished outside the top 20 quarterbacks in fantasy points. But in the other 4, he's been a top 12 fantasy quarterback. That includes quarterback 7 and quarterback 3 finishes. The quarterback 3 finish was this past week. He's shown us the upside. And again, this should be an upside spot, right? Carolina 31st in pass defense DVOA. They're 30th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. The Giants have a 23.5 point implied total. That's 12th highest on the week. It's ahead of teams like the Bengals, ahead of CJ Stroud's Texans, ahead of Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. So, Vegas is telling us this Giants offense should score points in this spot. So I'm definitely not going out of my way to start Daniel Jones, but if you have been kind of streaming at quarterback all season or have a struggling or hurt starter, if you were a Dak Prescott owner, I think Jones is one of the better week 10 spot starters.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with him being one of the better week 10 spot starters. I've got our quarterback strength of schedule page up on the screen right now. You can see the Giants have the 3rd best quarterback scoring matchup this week. So it certainly makes him an option. As you said, Jared, you have to know that you've got the volatility. There is definitely a chance that you start Daniel Jones, even in a good matchup, and you get massively disappointed because he had 2 passing touchdowns last week and a rushing score against a Washington defense that we've been talking about being better lately. 3 straight weeks before that, we got Daniel Jones 0 touchdowns in all those games. I had this decision this week for a team that has Geno Smith as its primary quarterback, just lost Dak Prescott for a while. So I was looking at who's going to be my week 10 fill-in. I chose Justin Herbert over Daniel Jones. It's a coin flip between those guys for me this week. I think Justin Herbert has a higher floor. I think Daniel Jones probably has a higher ceiling. I also, though, like Justin Herbert better as a platoon partner going forward, because I think with Geno Smith, I'd like to have a second quarterback that I can kind of decide week to week who I want. That pushed me over the top on Herbert versus Daniel Jones. So I think if somebody's facing that decision and they're like, well, why not play Jones this week? Good question. You can. You can definitely go ahead and play Jones. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between him and Justin Herbert and the other guys in that range of quarterback.
That's fair. I mean, if I was making the decision just for this week, I'd roll the dice and go with Daniel Jones. But, the factor of looking for someone to have for the rest of the season, I definitely prefer Justin Herbert to Daniel Jones for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I will probably have Daniel Jones higher in my week 10 specific rankings than Justin Herbert. But nothing you do with Daniel Jones feels comfortable, whether you're putting him high or putting him low.
Right, exactly.
The Giants are getting more comfortable giving the ball to Tyrone Tracy. He looked iffy heading into last weekend with a concussion, but once he got cleared, he got right back to a workhorse role. So how high do we put Tracy in this week's rankings in that, aforementioned positive matchup with the Panthers?
Top 20 running back play, I think, Tracy, this week. I'd be excited to have him in my lineup. He's pulled away from Devin Singletary as the Giants' clear lead back. Tracy's played between 60 and 70% of the team's snaps in the last 3 weeks with Singletary back. 42 carries over that span for Tracy to just 14 for Singletary. Singletary is still mixing in a decent amount on passing downs, which is like the only knock against Tracy at this point. Targets over the last 3 weeks, 7 for Tyrone Tracy to 4 for Devin Singletary. But we're playing Tracy for the rushing workload in this matchup against Carolina. Panthers dead last in both run defense DVOA and adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. The Panthers have allowed a running back to score 20 plus PPR points in 6 of 9 games this season. And 20 plus PPR points is going to make you easily a top 10 running back on the week, if not a top 5 running back. So that's the type of upside Tracy has. He'd be a tough guy for me to bench this week. I'd have to be really loaded at running back to bench him.
Yeah, you mentioned Tracy being at RB20 in our rankings right now. I think it's difficult to sort running backs 14 through 20 in those PPR rankings. 14 is DeAndre Swift, 20 is Tracy. I could see those guys really going in any order. And I would boost the next guy we're going to talk about into that range as well to make it even more difficult. On the other side of that Giants-Panthers game, we've got Chuba Hubbard, who's a bit lower in our rankings right now, but this morning got a contract extension from the Panthers, 4 years at an $8.3 million annual average. That ranks 9th among running backs under current contracts in the NFL. And Kevin pointed out in this week's Expert Moves article that Joe Person of The Athletic, Panthers beat writer, expects Hubbard to remain the workhorse for the Panthers the rest of the way this year. We've got Jonathan Brooks coming off the pup. Don't know yet if he's going to be playing in this game in Germany on Sunday morning. They could certainly make him inactive for that game and still get another 2 weeks before they put Brooks on the field. At some point, he's going to become somewhat of a factor in the offense. The question is how much, though? And I think that question, got a little tougher to answer with the Hubbard contract.
Yeah, a lot going on here. I mean, the whole Brooks thing has been funky for a while now. I mean, right after they drafted him, they said he should be back at some point during training camp. Then it got pushed. He's going to start the season on the PUP list, missed the first few games, and then he came back. He was limited and active. He's been full go in practice now for, he was full go all last week. He was full go on Wednesday of this week, but the Panthers still aren't committing to playing him in this game against the Giants. I was talking to, some of the Twitter doctors we follow, and they were saying that there could be swelling or something going on with the knee that's keeping him out. So something is up, I think, with that. I think the Hubbard contract points to that as well. Not that it's just about Jonathan Brooks, because Chuba Hubbard's been good. I mean, Hubbard was pretty good last year. He was 14th among 49 qualifying backs in PFF rushing grade. He's been even better this season. He's 7th in PFF rushing grade this year. He's also 7th in rush yards over expected per attempt. So he probably deserves the contract. I don't know what Carolina is doing, investing this much into the backfield, but it definitely makes it a tricky situation for dynasty owners and evaluating this backfield in 2025 and beyond. I do think Hubbard is going to remain the lead back here, at least in the short term, at least over the next few weeks. Like Brooks, they've been so cautious with him. I think he's going to have a pretty minimal workload when he does debut. And we'll see when we get into December how the backfield looks, how Brooks is playing, how Hubbard's playing. Maybe things change then. But I think Hubbard is still safe to use as like an RB2, at least for the next week or two.
I don't think it changes this season unless Hubbard gets hurt. I mean, when you sign a guy for $8 million a year for the next 4 seasons beyond this one, you're saying we really like how you play. And there's just no reason to hand the backfield over to somebody else this season, no matter what they thought of Jonathan Brooks. I think it clouds the outlook for Brooks's usage next year because that amount of money says that they really respect what Hubbard has done for them. I agree. He was probably better than credited for last year. I would say he was solid in 2023. He's been better than that this year on a team that doesn't look like it's really gotten any better overall. So I think impressive season for him. It's nice to see a running back get rewarded in this way. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of running a franchise to pay Chuba Hubbard that much right after you drafted a running back in the second round. Frankly, even if Jonathan Brooks's knee is in rougher shape than they thought and they don't know what his 2025 looks like, it's still a lot to give to a running back that has shown you the fungibility of that position. Like it was just within the past 2 years, it was last year where Miles Sanders came on with a bigger contract and Chuba Hubbard worked past him. So I don't know, in that team, we've already seen the contract not work out. So it's surprising, but good for Chuba Hubbard. And I think good for his usage profile going forward this season at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. The Panthers gave Sanders a similar 4-year deal prior to the 2023 season. Now, I was looking at that deal right after the Chuba Hubbard news broke, and the Panthers can get out of it pretty easily after this season. So I want to see the details on the Hubbard deal too, like how many years are actually locked in, because it could be similar to this Sanders deal, where it's really more of a 2-year deal. That stuff matters when we're talking about the dynasty value on these guys.
For this week, I'm pretty comfortably starting Chuba Hubbard against the Giants D that's ranked 22nd in total DVOA, 20th in rush DVOA, and even 21st in running back coverage DVOA.
Yeah, I think Hubbard's fine to use as an RB2, even if Brooks plays. We're going to have him projected versus a handful of carries, and I think Hubbard will get enough work to be a solid RB2.
Jared, it wasn't that long ago that the Bears offense seemed to be trending upward, and that is definitely not how you would describe them right now. So the question is, what do we do with not only Caleb Williams, but also his receivers? Because I think at this point, we have to say, sit Caleb Williams until he gives you a reason not to, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been 2 of Caleb Williams' worst games of the season coming off the bye. He hasn't looked good. The offensive line has remained just as bad as it's been all season. You got DJ Moore just walking off the field mid-play. Just a lot of messy stuff going on in Chicago. I will say, in Caleb's defense, I guess, Washington and Arizona's pass defenses have been trending up. You look at the numbers, you look at the production they've been allowing. They're both, I think, at this point, at least like average pass defenses, not the bottom 8 pass defenses we thought they were at the start of the season. New England has not improved at all. Williams gets this week. They're still 30th in pass defense DVOA, but the Patriots are also just as bad against the run. The Bears are pretty significant home favorites in this game. So if I'm the Bears in this spot, I'm just leaning on DeAndre Swift, who I like quite a bit this week. I think he's a borderline RB1 for season-long teams. He's someone I like in DFS this week. And I would try to bench Caleb Williams if I could all help it in one quarterback leagues.
Yeah, I think the matchup makes Caleb Williams somebody that you could reluctantly use, but I would rather not play him until he gives me a good game to believe in him. Because even the high-end games that we've seen from him, there haven't been that many. Certainly not enough to say, no, that's who he is in good matchups. We hope that's who he is, but we don't know yet. So I would comfortably play Swift. I would fairly comfortably play DJ Moore. What about Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, and Rome Odunze?
And so I looked up what these wide receivers have been doing since Keenan Allen returned in week 4. The targets are DJ Moore with 32, Keenan Allen with 31, Rome Odunze with 24, and Odunze has seen 13 of those 24 targets over the last 2 games, so he seems to be trending up. Expected fantasy points where they rank among wide receivers: DJ Moore 30th, Keenan Allen 44th, Rome Odunze 65th. Actual PPR points per game, DJ Moore just 37th, Keenan Allen way down at 57th, Odunze 69th. So I think, DJ Moore is still the leader here. The gap hasn't been as big as even I kind of thought it was since Allen returned. So I think, more a borderline wide receiver 2, more of a wide receiver 3, Allen and Odunze to me kind of more in wide receiver 4 range at this point, especially until we see better play from Caleb Williams and the Bears offense in general.
And what about Cole Kmet? We just forget about him at this point because the Bears are?
I think so, yeah. His route rate did rebound last week after, kind of losing stuff to Gerald Everett the week before. But I think Keenan Allen and even DJ Moore are just soaking up too many of those short range targets that had been going to Kmet for that brief hot stretch. So, Kmet is well outside our top 15 tight ends for the week. I'm assuming most fantasy teams can do better.
I will say, without a big late season rebound, it's going to be hard to imagine the Bears rolling with Shane Waldron as offensive coordinator again next season.
Bring Ben Johnson to Chicago. That'd be fun. But yeah, I think Waldron will be out after this year unless things improve quite a bit.
Trevor Lawrence looks like he's going to be out this week in Jacksonville at least. We'll see beyond that as he's dealing with an injury. And that means Mac Jones at the Jaguars helm for a matchup against the Minnesota Vikings and their blitz-heavy defense. Jared, what are we doing with the pass catchers? And I say at this point, I say that really only referring to Evan Engram and Brian Thomas Jr.
If you just look at Lawrence versus Mac Jones on paper, there's not much separating them. Career completion rate, Trevor Lawrence 63%, Mac Jones 66%. Career yards per pass attempt, 6.8 for both of them. Career adjusted yards per pass attempt, which also takes into account touchdowns and interceptions. Trevor Lawrence 6.5 to Mac Jones 6.3. On paper, not much of a downgrade at all. Now, we can't just go based on paper. And if I watch these quarterbacks play, I still think Trevor Lawrence is the more talented quarterback. He's also obviously much more familiar in this offense. So I do think it's a downgrade for the Jags passing game, which we honestly didn't like a whole lot in this spot anyways against the Vikings. I still think most teams will be starting Evan Ingram. I think, he's a volume bet anyways. I think Mac Jones probably, keeps that volume up around where it's been with Trevor Lawrence. I think Brian Thomas becomes a much more volatile fantasy starter, which he already was because he's, been living on the deep balls and the touchdowns. The floor gets lower with Mac Jones in there. There's still some upside. I'm not saying Brian Thomas is a must sit, but he dropped, 4 or 5 spots in our wide receiver rankings with this news on Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I'd probably go ahead, just looking at him versus others around him in our rankings, I would probably go ahead and play Ladd McConkey over him. Could kind of go either way on Calvin Ridley, who still doesn't have a quarterback. And then it gets, much more questionable beyond that. I think DeAndre Hopkins is the other one where I'd have a tough time sitting him after the way he performed against the Bucs on Monday night. But, in that range, I would say it's fairly nebulous.
Yep, that's fair. I think a lot of those guys, Ladd McConkey, DeAndre Hopkins, are probably even have higher floors than Brian Thomas. Thomas does still have the ceiling based on how they've been using him and just his talent.
And we have seen some good games from Mac Jones in his past, just more bad ones. Speaking of that range of wide receiver, DeAndre Hopkins is up next on our list. Got a matchup with the Broncos, which hasn't tended to be great for wide receiver ones. But Jared, is he too low in our rankings based on how he produced against the Bucs on Monday night last week?
Hopkins only sits 29th in our rankings this week because of this matchup against Denver. Hopkins obviously looked awesome in that game against the Bucs last week. Already seems to have some level of rapport with Patrick Mahomes. That deep ball to Hopkins was a broken play where he actually ran a short crossing route to start and saw Mahomes evading pressure and took it deep and made the nice catch downfield. So that's nice to see. Also, the usage was nice to see. Hopkins, he was up to a 69% route rate last week. So there's still room for that to climb. Like I would expect him to be higher than that even this week. He also was in the slot for 37% of his snaps last week. That's important this week too, because we want Hopkins ideally away from Pat Surtain. And Pat Surtain's only gone into the slot for 6% of his snaps this week. So I think if Hopkins goes inside, he should avoid Surtain on those snaps. That should be enough to make Hopkins, usable in fantasy this week. It's still a tough matchup. Denver's 4th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Again, I think you're going to see Hopkins, closer to wide receiver 20 in our rankings going forward. It's just, this matchup does, I think, downgrade him to a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, there's some downside risk to this one, as you mentioned. But I was going to mention the slot numbers too. 45.7% of pass snaps in the slot against Tampa Bay on Monday night. And that's for a guy who has spent just 21% of his time in the slot for his career. Did hit 55.6% in week 1 of this season with the Titans, but immediately back outside after that, and 22% over his 6 total appearances with Tennessee before the trade. I think that slot usage is why I wouldn't worry too much about Hopkins this week. I would expect that they'll put him in there a fair amount because they still don't have a whole lot going for them at wide receiver. They have Hopkins. They have maybe Xavier Worthy, although I'm not sure that he was actually playing in the Monday night game. So I think that they'll try to get him going. They'll try to move him away from Surtain, and I would not work too hard to find a different option to play in place of Hopkins this week for that reason. And speaking of a rapport with Patrick Mahomes, I mean, does anybody besides Sky Moore not have a rapport with that guy? He seems very easy to get along with.
Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but yeah, that's probably just those two.
I thought about that name. I think the rapport was there. There were just no hands on the other end of it.
That's fair.
Final wide receiver before we head out of here, Jaylen Waddle, frustrating people everywhere in fantasy. Jared, is it time to just bench him?
I think he's benchable. I don't think he's like a must bench this week. So we have the 4 games this year with Tua. I mean, really 3.5 because he left the Bills game around halftime. But if we look at those 4 games, 12% target share for Jaylen Waddle in those 4 games. That's behind Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, and Jonnu Smith. Now, 2 of those 4 games came against the Bills, which are one of the best wide receiver defenses in the league, especially outside wide receivers like Jaylen Waddle. We did see Waddle go for 109 yards in week 1 against Jacksonville. He was not as good in the other game with Tua against Arizona. But again, the Cardinals pass defense has been a bit better. So I'm worried about Waddle because I don't think the Achane passing game usage is going away. I don't think Jaylen Waddle is going to see a 12% target share the rest of the season. I think he can get up to, 18-ish% going forward. And I think is enough to at least make him a wide receiver 3 in this offense. So I guess that's kind of how I'm treating Waddle at this point. Wide receiver 3 still has the boom potential because of the big play ability. Is probably also going to have some more duds because Achane's playing such a big role in the passing game. And Waddle does does get a nice spot this week. The Rams are 19th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. That game has a high over-under. I think it should be a high-scoring game. So again, I think Waddle's a wide receiver 3 this week. So he's benchable, but he's not a must bench to me.
If he doesn't score this week, like I don't mean find the end zone, but have a good PPR outing for us, I think he's gonna be a lot closer to must bench in terms of being outside our top 36 at wide receiver next week. I wouldn't feel great either way because of the matchup. There is upside to the spot, but just 4.25 targets per game, even in the 4 Tua starts this year, no more than 4 catches in a game since the opener. Not a lot to like other than the talent. You just hope that they, I don't know, feel like they're underusing him and want to get him involved. I'd really like to get a Mike McDaniel quote about how they want to get Jaylen Waddle going. That would help me feel better about keeping Waddle in my lineup.
I do think we should take a step back here too and just remember who Jaylen Waddle is, right? Like awesome college producer, 6th overall pick of his draft, had an excellent rookie season. It had been really good since then. So it's really just 4 games. I'm throwing out all the non-Tua games. Right? It's really just 4 games with Waddle. And again, 2 of them have been in one of the worst matchups for wide receivers in the league.
Yep. It's all fair. He might blow up this week and it might seem like a silly conversation a week from right now. So, we'll see where it goes. That's how this game works. You can check the rankings on your format on draftsharks.com right now, but your best starting recommendations can be found on your team intel page. That is synced directly with your team and your league. It knows your scoring system and exactly who you have on your roster. Not only customizes our weekly projections to fit your scoring, it also factors in upside. It addresses your flex positions. Team Intel is really the only lineup advisor that you're going to need to set your lineup each week. And it's a key part of making Draft Sharks your unfair advantage.